The thing about the beginning of the Rite of Spring is that I think Stravinsky had in his head L'après-midi. Yes, the breakthrough piece of Debussy, one of the most important pieces of music ever written, obviously. And that starts with a flute solo, and that was a very unusual idea. And from nothing, this flute appears. That note, beginning of L'après-midi, is one semitone higher than the bassoon plays at the beginning of Rite of Spring. So the bassoon starts on a C in the middle of the treble clef. Now, that's not actually that high a note. And actually the solo itself is not that difficult. It's just that you have to put it in context. As a performer, back in the first, second decade of the 20th century, as a bassoon player, you weren't used to a concert hall going completely quiet. Maestro comes on, silence, and you're expected to play this high C from nothing on your own and carry on your own for a while. So I think that's the reason it gained this notoriety, because the notes themselves are actually not that hard. And even Weber, 100 years before, in his bassoon concerto, wrote high D for the bassoon, but it was in the middle, the context being that it was in the middle of a virtuosic passage, really loud, and you fly up and you play a chromatic ascent to a high D. So those notes were always there. It's the context. So it just makes you realize how things can develop particular notoriety for reasons that people don't quite understand. But I'm absolutely convinced that that's what it is. It was the context, not the difficulty.
So Stravinsky wants the bassoonist to be a bit exposed?
I think, maybe in his mind, there was this... obviously, L'Après-Midi became such a massive hit and iconic piece. Even, what was it? It was 15 or so years after it was written, the Rite was written. But that effect of the flute coming from nowhere, this was Stravinsky's version of it. But Stravinsky is writing a piece about, arcane Russian tribes from the steppes, back prehistoric. And he wanted something that was a bit weird, a bit otherworldly. A flute on a C sharp in the middle of the treble clef sounds perfectly normal. The bassoon, it's really different. And the sound of the French bassoon is slightly different, so it would have been slightly more nasal, slightly thinner, a little bit quavery maybe. It was very cleverly calculated.
Is there any chance you can play us the opening solo?
Well, give it a go. Yeah.
I know this is a very mean thing to ask.
It's a very mean thing.
This early in the morning.
So, let me just blow a few notes. You have to imagine, from my point of view, you play the first half. Rite of Spring is the second half of a concert type piece. You play the first half of a concert. Could be very hard, lots of difficult things to do. Then you have an interval, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever. And all you're thinking about during the interval is the articulation of that first note. And your memory banks, this is why it's exactly the same as sports psychology. You have to work on the positive elements, and repetition when you practice is incredibly important, so that you know you can do it. But there is a strange thing when the conductor comes on the stage, and that you get that diminuendo, perfect diminuendo of clapping from the audience, and then there's this strange silence. The temptation very often, I think, is to launch in and just get it over and done with. Very tempting. Esa-Pekka Salonen, our chief conductor, is absolutely fantastic in this respect, because his whole platform presence is incredibly calm until he gets excited conducting. But he's got this kind of zen thing about him, which is actually very nice for a soloist. And you get that little bit of eye contact, and then he just goes like that. So, and I start, because nothing starts with me, so I can start when I like. But I generally, at that point, I think, I sort of count to 5 or so, and then I just get into that zen space. And he's fine with it. So the idea is a nice silence. And then normally, generally speaking, one starts notes by tonguing the reed. What I do is just get all the air pressure right, blow some air through the reed, and just intensify the pressure a bit until something happens, until the reed speaks. Yeah? That's the basic sound. It's just because I haven't blown it for about 20 minutes. So. That's how I want to start the piece. So that the audience becomes sort of aware that something's happened. It's not the bassoon starts. It's, yeah. So you become aware of it, yeah? And then he proceeds. So that's the first strain of the melody. The idea being, he said, that he picked this little set of notes from a Lithuanian folk song. His typical Stravinsky, he was very provocative. Nobody's ever been able to hear or find, nobody knows where this came from. He could have dreamt it. You know, he's famous for dreaming music, Stravinsky. But the idea, I think, about the solo is it has to be very simple. I try not to put any kind of what you'd call learned classical music phrasing, technique or anything into it. I try to play it as simply as possible. Because I have in my head one of two things. Because the Rite of Spring is supposed to be a description of the ice at the end of the Russian winter, splitting and the green shoots coming through, and then you have all the bird song during the introduction. But it's like one tiny green shoot coming through this split ice and snow. So you can either see it as a naturalistic thing, or you could imagine some prehistoric bard or a musician with just a piece of wood blowing some notes through it. You can see it either way. But in my opinion, either way, it mustn't be 21st century classically trained bassoonist playing beautifully. It's got to be somehow a little bit weird and what is this? Because that's the mystery of the piece throughout.